two of the project-based tax increment financing for housing infrastructure under John Gray's name. And we have your terrific side-by-side, which will help us appreciate the difference between the current proposal and the original TIF statute. So John, without further ado, it's yours.
Perfect. So John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. Good morning, everyone. I can make that a little bigger. So I've already heard my first request, which is to include a short title for CHIP. That's not in here now, but I will do that.
Thank you.
And this, as you guys know, just to orient, we're treating this as a standalone package right now, but this is for consideration for inclusion in the committee bill. So once this is kind of settled and agreed, we can drop this into that bigger document.
Committee housing bill.
Right, in our committee housing bill.
So there are really just a few changes made in this draft 2.2. I think they all occur within the first 7 pages or so. So I will call them out. I'm going to try to be cognizant of time limitations here and how many folks you guys want to have in the chair. So let me just hit those quickly. The first is on the first page.
Fred, can you hit the okay? Great.
There had been a request to kind of boost the definition for developer. So that's been changed to say developer means the person undertaking to construct a housing development. Again, I think this could be quite a broad definition. So I think this captures what you're trying to get at, but this avoids using development 3 times for the sentence. So a virtue. On the second page, a more substantive update, which is to the definition of improvements. So just to contextualize, improvements are the kinds of things that financing is going towards. So it's the infrastructure that's being constructed through the program. As you know, for big TIFs, for TIF districts, there's a public purpose constraint on the definition of improvements. And that same purpose constraint has been applied here. It's been included here. So it now says improvements means the installation or construction of infrastructure that will serve a public purpose and fulfill the purpose of housing infrastructure tax increment financing as stated in section 1907 of this subchapter. We'll come to that 1907 shortly. That's where you can kind of include the purposes you think this program is meant to get at. And I have a generic statement there now. But yes, this update to the definition of improvements is just to ensure that there's a public purpose constraint so that any improvements developed through the program do serve public purposes and are not exclusively for private use.
Public dollars.
I just want to flag that maybe we say public good instead of public purpose.
We talked about that, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
And I'm not sure.
Public purpose ever not be good.
Well, no,
Public good,
it's that
though.
a good might not be a good might not be a purpose that is public. It's the opposite. You might have a private purpose that's a public good. It's
Yeah.
what we've been
Right, which is
mulling.
yeah, which is some of the housing proposals are more private goods, but serve a public good.
like parking and housing.
Um,
I mean, I'm open, but I do think,
we did discuss
yeah,
that last week.
I wouldn't want things to get stuck on one word in
Right.
important projects.
Council, would you kind of have to think about that and give us a
I think
At
that
some
you
point.
can do either. I don't think purpose is as limited as I don't think it just means that there is a stated idea out there that the public is pursuing this particular purpose. Like I read it sort of interchangeably with public good, but if you guys feel that that's clear as to what you're trying to capture, I don't see a harm in it.
I'm doing a lot of public meetings with people who would bring up arguments about that word. I think it would forestall a lot of delay about what is a public purpose versus a public good.
That's right.
Sure. That's easy enough to
So it's clear there's a nuance here that I'm not quite up to speed on. What is this? Does this exclude a commercial build of housing? That's not
No.
necessarily low income and what have you, or there's obviously a reason for the.
I would say in a legal opinion presenting to us might say that is a public purpose. we have a lot of, disagreement out in the field about a lot of the words that we've put on paper related to housing.
Well, and I think particularly with tax increment financing, I think this because of the shift of how this money is flowing and how it's being used, I think underscoring that it's a public fund, even if it's privately owned, is important. But the nuance of it is, I think, let's think about it.
I'm just.
Hi, David, we have a chair.
My question really is it excluding something that we really need to be cognizant in the development of this pyramid?
That is a good question, and I think a good one for our ledge council.
So the first thing to say on this is that what we're talking about here is within the definition of improvements rather than the development itself, which is what you just picked. So I think that's key here because you're creating infrastructure. And the reason that the prior draft did not include this qualifying statement about serving a public purpose is that it was understood that the housing development to be stimulated is the accepted public good that's being pursued by the program. So it was kind of agnostic as to whether or not the infrastructure installed independently serves some kind of public purpose.
Right.
And the other way that you could put this is if you think that the construction of infrastructure is stimulating the development of housing development, which is a public good, you will almost necessarily have met this qualifying statement that it will serve a public purpose. So I don't maybe see it as big of a deal as I think the committee maybe does. But I think it's nice to include the public purpose just to ensure that the infrastructure isn't somehow exclusively for private use.
Right.
But if you could kind of broadly construe the fact that it's stimulating housing development and that serves a public good is meeting this condition, if that makes sense.
Right.
But I think it is important to note that this public purpose constraint is on the improvements part and not on the housing part. The housing development can just be a housing development, assuming it meets the affordability conditions of the
Right. Okay, let's think about it pretty, David?
The last comment, the affordability conditions.
We'll come to that. That was not something that was part of the last draft.
Well, I was wondering if that's really the soul of public.
What the public is doing.
Yeah.
No, for me, that's not the sole piece of it.
Okay.
No, the sole piece of it is it may be privately owned, but it's a public good to have more housing.
Yeah,
To me,
It's a pretty broad.
I'm a simple brain on this one.
it's a pretty broad.
Okay, great. David, we're just cruising through the changes in the draft and looking at the changes and comparing TIP, and we look forward to you chatting after we do.
Great, thank you.
So we can jump down to page 4. There's a new section added here. This is conversation starter language for a purpose section. And this is pulled into the definition that we just talked about. So improvements, that qualifying statement said that will serve a public purpose and will also fulfill the purpose of this subchapter. So you have this condition here that kind of spells out what you're trying to do with the program. And that's a requirement that's applied to the definition of improvement. So the purpose of housing infrastructure tax increment financing is to provide revenues for improvements and related costs to stimulate the development of affordable housing. It's quite a broad purpose that you have here. You can boost this, you can change this. You can look to the existing purpose section that's on the books for tax increment financing districts. That's in Title 24. But I think that this is probably what you guys are trying to get at. The thing I would call out here is if you want to stick with something as simple as this, knowing what affordable housing means would be important. And I would call out that Title 24 does have an existing definition of affordable housing. It would not necessarily be picked up here because it's confined to a particular subchapter, but you could pull that in, or you could create a specific definition of affordable housing for this. There's all kinds of ways to approach this, but I would just say, think about whether or not this is the kind of purpose you want to have for the program, if this is what you're trying to stimulate. And if you do want something like this, think about what's meant by affordable housing.
A good discussion, because for me, there is a broader purpose, which is it's project based. So it's more, we don't use that term here. So it's not as large. And for me, it's important to express that this is for a wide range of communities and perhaps smaller, more rural communities. Maybe that's too much. Maybe we could say it, but for me, that's part of what's workable and useful in this proposal is that if we can, hopefully smaller, more rural communities will be able to access this opportunity.
So a few things about that. To me, that all makes sense to me. And I think that is the genesis of the conversation here. That's kind of the context for this. I think of some of those concerns as kind of like intent concerns rather than like this purpose is drawn into that definition of improvement. So we're trying to talk about what constrains what's done there. And this could also inform some of the rulemaking if Pepsi undertakes rulemaking for this particular program. So I think being specific as to just like what the aims are rather than who's meant to avail themselves of it, because presumably this would be available. The hope is that rural communities would take this up across the state, but there's nothing in this that excludes others from doing so. I don't think you need to have
Absolutely
a
not.
purpose
But
there.
I mean, for me, when we get to it, I'm hoping this will be enable 1B and tier 2 and tier 1B as well, not just
So the other question you might ask here is if the purpose is just to stimulate the development of housing, it doesn't have to be affordable. You could have affordability constraints within condition. You know, you could have affordability kick-ins, but you could just say that this is about stimulating the development of housing.
we could include it in intent. So are we thinking about developing an intent section in addition to a purpose?
It's you guys call. I think some of the stuff you can do in floors, like if you're just trying to contextualize the program, what it's meant to get at, some of that is floor speech rather than the bill itself. I would, I think given limited time, it's probably nice to just focus on getting the bill.
So then maybe we'll focus on being more specific in our purpose. Thomas, do you have a thought? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, Brand.
You tend to leave in then to stimulate the development of affordable housing, because I still don't know what affordable housing is. And without a definition,
Yes.
you don't know what it is.
Can we, is it
There's a HUD
possible?
definition, which is 30%. But I'm not sure that that's what's intended. And 30% of a community, if the community is composed of $1 million houses, doesn't do what you intended it. You need a definition or you don't put it in at all.
I would agree. You need a
Yeah.
definition of affordable housing. The one that's in Title 24 may not be what you guys are trying to get at here because the figures are relatively low. And I think that you are trying to get at something broader. We'll come to an affordability piece later related to the project criterion that's new, that relates to 200% of AMI. The figures in the Title 24 definition are for owner occupied, 120% of AMI, 30% of 120% AMI, and then for renter, 80%. I think those figures are probably low. So based on just the discussions that I've heard. So if you do want to include something like this, I would completely agree. You need to say what affordable.
Okay, good. We'll put a pin in it and get a definition. And we could even, for purposes of this chapter and for purposes of this program, we could have a definition, our own definition.
Exactly. We can create one here that has different AMI qualifiers.
Okay.
So long as you don't create something that becomes a nightmare to administer and something that is constantly changing.
I think that may be
That
what you
is
hear.
Jessica's testimony, yeah. Because we're looking at Pepsi to manage this, work with our communities to do this. Okay,
So jumping down, next change on the same page, line 15, little addition here. This was Senator Chinden's suggestion to ensure that we could reduce some of the burdens on municipalities as they pursue these particular programs, to create a housing infrastructure project and housing development site, the municipality in coordination with stakeholders shall. So this is making clear that they can draw on those stakeholders to develop this particular, their application like this.
great.
The next changes, many of which are readability related, are on page 6. So I tried to increase clarity for this application section. We're at the bottom of page 6, talking about section 1910. This is your project application and BEPC's review. You're going to see that I've added subsection headings for each subsection, just to make clear what each section is dealing with.
The Zoom link you said.
Oh, do you want your phone?
Oh, we got.
Essential tools.
So I've added subsection headings so that these can be more easily referenced and people know what, it'll be easier to talk about this and discuss things. So first section is just setting out that there is an application. On page 7, there will be updates to subsection B. These are all readability updates. They are not substantive changes, but I think this reads a lot clearer as to what BEPC may approve on the basis of. You have to meet process requirements, project criteria, and one of the location criteria. And then I've simplified, as we'll come to shortly, the location criteria, so that we don't have to rely on like a 20 subdivision cross-reference to talk about this. We can just talk about subdivision P1. So these are not substantive changes from the last draft. These are exclusively readability changes.
And is location, in our use of the word location all the way through here, does that identify, that doesn't, we don't need to further identify that with tiers?
It is you're saying the subsection heading updates here, like review process requirements. When we come down to subdivision E or subsection E, you'll see that titled location criteria. So it's just making clear what the cross reference is. So process requirements, that's what subsection C is dealing with. Subsection D, there is a substantive change here. So these are your project criteria, but the substantive change is on page 8. This was Senator Ron Hinsdale's suggestion for addressing the affordability piece, some of which we were just discussing. So as you'll recall from the last time we talked about this, there is no but-for requirement in this proposal in the same way the various for TIF districts. Senator Ron Hinsdale had proposed doing something like a but-for test to produce an affordability piece. So your project criteria here are at least 50% of the gross floor area of the projected housing development is dedicated to housing, and subdivision 2, the projected housing development would not have included housing affordable to a household with an income equal to or less than 200% of AMI, but for the proposed utilization of incremental tax revenues. What this is saying is you wouldn't have had affordable housing in the absence of the increment. That's basically what it's saying. What I would call out substantively is this means you cannot rely on this program then to work for proposals that could have achieved affordable housing in the absence of the increment, which is maybe not something you would intend to happen. But if it is the case empirically right now that those are just not penciling out, then maybe that concern doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
Can I ask John, can you repeat the last comment?
Yeah, I
Yes,
think that may be.
You made it for a reason.
Yes. So the way that the but-for works is it's saying you're going to have to meet both of these criteria. You're going to dedicate at least 50% of gross floor area to the projected housing development. And we need to know that the projected housing development wouldn't have included affordable housing, as we spelled out here, but for using incremental tax revenues. So it's saying we're using tax increment revenues to make these projects pencil out in the hope of producing affordable housing. If you formulate it in this way as a but-for test, part of what it excludes is housing developments that could have achieved affordable housing without the increment, but that would have been advantaged by the increment. If it is the case that those projects just don't exist out there, then that doesn't particularly matter. If people think you have to essentially subsidize housing to create it, that's a non-concern. But I just wanted to draw empirically that if an applicant could produce affordable housing without the increment and wanted to avail themselves of the increment under this program, they wouldn't meet this subdivision 2 criterion. Is that clear?
That makes sense. And in 5 years after inflation, perhaps, or 10 years after inflation has come down a bit, and we have a lot more workforce, perhaps we will revisit this. But at the moment, my guess is that none of these projects will pencil out unless we.
I get the question as I read this. This strikes me as being potentially very subjective. Because developer A says, I can do this, and I can do this project. It wouldn't look quite like this because it'd be made of paper and paper mache and cardboard, but it would be occupable. This doesn't strike me as a definition that I'd be comfortable with avoiding controversy, argument, and litigation.
So to that point, one of the some of the discussion that we had the last time was about the impracticality of the but-for test broadly for districts. There was a concern with doing that, and there was still a suggestion to use a but-for for the economic criteria, which I get the idea, the concept makes sense. If you want to include an economic or an affordability type criterion, you don't have to do it through a but-for test.
Well, I mean, again, from an audit perspective, I would expect that the auditors would be the first one to yell about this.
But he on the whole doesn't like tips, period.
I know that, but
So I mean, it's
Madam Chair,
one that, and in this particular but-for, I just strikes me as very, very subjective, actually, and subject to disagreement.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Keisha.
I think I requested this, and
I think what John just said resonates with me, that I don't think I was, now that I see it written down, I wasn't trying to make it a but for test exactly. I was basically trying to say this should be affordable for, you know, middle income folks. We shouldn't be using this to build luxury housing. And area median income in Chittenden County, for example, is 95,000 right now. So this would mean it's affordable for people making up to 190,000. And I guess I'm not married to the language. I'm just trying to figure out how to ensure that we are creating middle income and workforce
Right.
housing.
That makes sense. I would point out that existing TIP districts in Title 32, 5404 AH, their project criteria includes an affordable housing criterion, and you could use something like that here. Or you could have a dedicated, in the same way that we say at least 50% of gross floor area would be dedicated to housing, you could have at least specified percentage of housing
Would meet this.
is achievable at 30% of, the income of someone making 200% of AMI, something like that. So you can have a criterion that doesn't use a but for that achieves affordability.
Would that satisfy you?
It's the numbers that I would like people to provide other feedback on. That has come up, like 40% of the units are at 200% of AMI or less. I think people in the room and beyond know what I'm trying to do, which is not just create deeply affordable housing for very low income people, but to try and make sure most of the projects that we fund are at 200% area median income or below. I mean, what I worry about is just saying 40%. What does that mean? The other 60%, is if that much outside of area median income, honestly.
And David.
I have just a general question. So here in economic development, we seem to latch on to area median income as a criteria, as a kind of a scale. In health and welfare, we always used federal poverty index levels, which was very straightforward. The poverty index level, the household size, and you could peg what that really meant to a wage earner. Is there such a chart for area median income so we can reference?
I believe there is. Kirby, do we know? Do we have a similar chart for AMI? I think we do.
This is federal poverty index. We have something for area.
Can we keep this to the council? This is a good JFO question, not JFO.
Yeah, no, I know, but I pictured tax, so I can.
Well, area
I
median
still
income
avoid numbers.
is also an issue.
We'll ask JFO.
But that is also an issue in terms of the area that you're talking about.
Right.
Because you have some areas based on the standard metropolitan index or whatever it is that are very, very broad. So that Chittenden County and Richford, for example, Burlington and Richford have the same numbers as do South Hero.
Right.
They're not comparable at all.
Right. I would be happy to, we can continue to work on this. Let's peg this and come up with, let's look at that language that you just suggested, John,
Okay,
as an alternative.
sounds good.
And let's move forward. I'm just
Yep.
trying to.
I can also hop over the chair shortly. The highlights you see here to location criteria, none of this is substantive. This is just meant to simplify readability of this section. We had talked last week about the fact that there's a difference between the kind of envisioned approval required based on the location criteria. So one could receive staff approval and one would require a board determination. To make that simpler, I've condensed those that are treated alike. So in step one, you see area designated tier 1A or tier 1B, or an area exempt pursuant to the interim housing exemptions. Those are your staff approvals, so they're just treated in the same location criterion. And then your existing settlement or area within 1/2 mile, which is your board determination required location criterion. Those have been treated in subdivision 2. So this is just readability and simplification.
In subdivision 2, would that would include tier 2 communities that were designated?
I honestly don't know. I can tell you what an existing settlement is, and maybe you guys, given the committee that you are, will know how to respond. An existing settlement is an area that constitutes one of the following: a designated center or an existing center that is compact in form and size, that contains a mixture of uses that includes a substantial residential component that has significantly higher densities and densities that occur outside the center and that is typically served by municipal infrastructure such as water, wastewater, sidewalks, paths, etc. Doesn't include strict development. My guess is, unless those things to you sound contiguous with tier 2, and I'm guessing they don't. If you want to add tier 2, you would need a separate criterion, I guess. But this is outside the scope of mine.
Okay, Thomas.
So I would love to add tier 2. I mean,
Me
if
too.
we just did area designated tier 1A, 1B, or tier 2, can we do that?
You guys can do whatever you want.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right,
to me.
but I thought there were, yeah, no, it strikes me as that makes it simpler, but the requirement is that it be, I think what is important in number 2 is that it be in an existing settlement and where do we use the word designation? For me, it's important that it be a designated
If I could,
village center, but it could be in tier 2. So how could we add that? Where would that be appropriate to be added?
if I could add on to that though, so really
Yeah.
smart people that are advocating for housing throughout Vermont have been reaching out to me over the past couple of days, and one specifically highlighting that as this is currently worded with the existing settlement, it would require and only enable, just offer this opportunity for areas that already have municipal sewer and infrastructure. There are parts of Vermont that want to grow, and this is not saying the growth is going to occur there. This is not forcing that to happen. What this is doing is just making available this possible opportunity for
Absolutely.
areas that know that we need housing. And so that's where I think tier 2 makes a lot of sense. It's not forcing the housing there. It's just making this more accessible to all the parts of Vermont where people want to live.
I completely agree. I'm just trying to figure out which section those 2 it belongs in, but I would love, yeah? Keisha?
I agree with Tom that just adding tier 2 takes care of it because my sense is we're moving in that direction and away from this more strict definition of what is a designated area because those are often circular. And we looked at Fairhaven, that wasn't a designated downtown, that was just an old racetrack that very much should have housing. So I think tier 2 allows a community to get in the driver's seat about where they see future transitional
I agree.
growth.
I completely agree. So I just have the question of where we put it. But
You can put it in 1. The substantive effect of including it in 1 is that if you do maintain this distinction between staff and board approval, the tier 2 would have available pure staff approval. I think you're likely to hear comments on this approach shortly. So,
okay.
But I guess, so John, I mean, now I'm confused myself. Tier 1A, B, or tier 2 is still going to take a little while, right? We have interim exemptions. Would this have to be grafted onto our interim exemptions for anyone to take advantage of it before, who knows when these maps are going to be done?
Well, Charlie keeps saying December 26th.
so I think other folks will probably be better positioned to respond to that question, but I'd understood conceptually that including tier 1A or tier 1B and potentially tier 2 plus an area exempt from the provisions of that chapter was meant to, that the interim exemptions were meant to get you to the arrival of those maps and the like. Honestly, I don't know the land use law, so I can't speak to that piece, but that was my understanding conceptually, is that interim housing exemptions were meant to carry you to that point. But we would need to talk to Ellen and other folks when we start talking that.
Great.
That is the extent of changes that are in this draft.
And then just to read the,
Yeah,
Clarifying of that.
exactly. I'm happy to talk about other things. I can
would you be,
do
just
differences.
quickly talk about this other document that you have kindly produced?
Sure.
There's a lot of work. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, let me just try to hit some high points in here. And this is mainly intended for you guys as a reference document. It's not, I'm hoping to help you see gaps where you see a difference between this and Big TIF and you think, oh, why don't we do this here? Or you think, oh, that's great that we don't do this here. So it's really just meant to identify gaps and make clear what are distinctive.
Are there some key things, because it's a longish document, or is there some key things you want us to focus on and go through it?
Let's jump to the creation of municipal district. I don't have page numbers here, but it's the second substantive page. Yeah.
It's the second subsection.
So what the section talks about is what it takes for a municipality to actually create the geographic plan. The distinctions that I would draw here is that for Big TIF, unlike this project-based approach, a municipality must find that the creation of the district serves public purposes. So that's beyond, we talked about public purposes constraint applying to the definition of improvements. I think there are conceptual reasons that you would not need to have this in this approach. For TIF districts, you're creating an area in which multiple projects, multiple developments might be pursued. It's much tighter with projects, so I don't think you need something like that here. I would call it there's slightly different commencement dates for when the TIF district or the housing development site starts. This matters because that's when OTV is set. That's when the original taxable value is set. So for TIF districts,
That goes to the grand list. That's when the grand list is.
and it affects the increment that's generated, right? Because your OTV gives you the difference between that initial value and whatever new property values you have. So I would just call out that there is a difference for TIF districts. It's April 1 of the calendar year voted by the legislative body. And for this project-based approach, the housing development site commences April 1 of the calendar year in which BEPC approves the use of TIF for the project. So that could be a year later. It could be further on because you're going to create the district. You're going to create the housing development site. For the TIF district, you'd be triggering OTV April 1 of that calendar year. But for housing development site through this program, it would depend on when you actually got BEPC approval, which could come in a subsequent calendar year. So it's just to call out, you could have differences in OTV.
So we're building in more flexibility.
I don't know that I'd call it more flexibility. It's a way of assigning the original taxable value. And there's a different way to do it too, which is that you could have them created in the same way, April 1 of the calendar year voted. That sort of intuitively makes sense because it's the municipality that creates the geographic area, right? Like it would make sense for that creation of it to be tied to the municipality's decision. I think the reason that this is included here is to generate the OTV. So you could also have the creation on a particular date and set OTV upon approval. So there's different ways to do it, but that's it.
I think we'd look to
Yeah.
our partner BEPC to help us on that.
The next point on this page, I think, is really important, which is that TIF districts are subject to a numerical restriction.
Right.
There's a consideration of the aggregate, exactly. No more than 2 per county and no more than six approved by BEPC, additional to those on their books in Title 24.
Which we hope will change this year.
And those are listed below, but what I would call out is those are meant to get at the aggregate effects of tax increment financing. There are no such caps in place for the project-based approach. So theoretically, these could proliferate across the state and there wouldn't be the kind of aggregate check that's in place for these. What I would say to qualify that is you do still have the information reporting pieces that go to the legislature and the like that might get at some of that. But I do think not having the numerical caps, the numerical restriction is something important to note that is distinctive here.
And as we continue our conversation, we may or may not entertain such a thing, but if the moment I think we need to let it roll out and see what happens. And if we're overwhelmed, then we can take it.
I agree with you, Madam Chair, and I'd love to have that problem. That'd be a
I know.
great problem.
That's a
Just building
problem.
Too many
Bring it on.
houses.
Public, bring it on. Okay, but we have to first get this tool out into the public.
I can keep going with this, but
So I think given our time,
Yeah.
we have David and Jessica here. I think I'm gonna shift, if it's okay with David. David, I'm sorry, we got you here earlier and,
That's okay.
but I think let's shift to our partner, who's going to help make all this possible, which is BEPC. And so if we could maybe, if you two could shift chairs, that would be great. And that would be terrific, because I think, and I think there may be, so we welcome Jessica.
Good morning.
Good morning. You have all your RDCs behind you. Very supportive.
That's great.
Well, not all of them. Some of them had to leave. We weren't. I don't know what happened, but there we go. So
They're a pleasant surprise this morning.
yeah, welcome. And this program relies in large measure on all parties partnering with Betsy.
Mhm.
And so we would love to have Betsy weigh in and see how we can make this work for you as well. And it's yours.
Great, thanks.
And I think we have handouts that Jessica sent yesterday.
Right, so.
Thank you, Heidi.
Just for the record, I'm Jessica Hartley and I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. I did send my comments and some proposed language changes.
I forwarded those to John.
So that was based on draft 1.1,
Oh, sorry.
not
It's
on.
pretty similar to.
Okay, so I have not reviewed or looked at draft 2.2. I was looking at it for the very first time half an hour ago when John was going through. So I can just,
Then you can do it high level if you want.
yeah, that would be great. And then I'd like to be able to take a look at the changes, and then I can either come back or I can write comments. It's up to the committee, but I will just go through my comments that I wrote in the memo yesterday. So based on Betsy's observation of the current TIF districts, and conversations that we've been having with municipalities, using a project-based TIF model, it's really important that economic development projects, mixed-use projects be considered. Tailoring this only to affordable housing or housing in general when you're trying to build out infrastructure becomes, frankly, an administrative nightmare, because how will VEPC be able to take a water pipe, and say, municipality, you can only use that water pipe for housing? When that water pipe, I was just in Manchester last week. They used CRRP funding, in addition with other types of funding, to run a water and wastewater pipe 1 mile. They were able to extend out their wastewater lines. And now that line is going to have workforce housing, a daycare, a potential resort, upgrade to a mobile home park.
How fabulous, all in 1 mile.
Yeah, and they're gonna upgrade their public service. So their fire department, their town offices, and their police station will also be able to access infrastructure. Under a project-based TIF model, that this, as it's currently proposed, that wouldn't be able to happen. The only pieces that would be able to happen would probably be the upgrade to the mobile home park. And so from VEPC's perspective, that's not going to be administratively possible to administer, because we are not going to be out there with our surveying equipment and looking and making sure that the town is only using water and wastewater lines to service affordable housing, when they could be missing out on many different opportunities to have mixed uses for water and wastewater, which is only going to bolster the economic development of their community, which is only going to bolster their brand list.
Right.
So we have seen through the larger TIF program that non-housing projects do increase the commercial tax base. They generate long-term municipal revenue that can fund essential services, and then ultimately reduce the long-term tax burdens on residents. So VEPC would like to see mixed-use development based on the needs of the municipalities. We also have projects that may require mixed use in order to generate enough increment to pay back their debt service. Housing projects alone may not generate enough increment. And that's something we've also seen in the larger TIF projects. So that's comment 1. In terms
And as we contemplate this,
Yeah.
we're contemplating project based. So we're contemplating smaller. So
Right.
to me, smaller is not a mile of water pipe.
No, but you do have a project like in the town of Rockingham, which they want to access,
Very small town.
very
Well-
small town.
Yeah.
They want to revitalize the brownfield. I think it was a Barra site. Right.
Brella, I think.
What was it?
Certainly Brella.
Yeah. And that contemplates a mixed use, having housing and commercial. They want to create a food hub or some sort of a co-op in their basement of the building, and then have housing and other commercial
Right.
offices above it. Again, administratively, that's going to be very difficult, and they may not meet that 50% footprint that you're requiring as one of your criteria. So
No, I appreciate that.
those are
I-
just two.
I also, in my mind, think that this project based might be something as big as something as more modest, like a massive septic system that is really only for enabling one modest housing project.
Right.
So I think what is a challenge here is there's a range of size with project base.
There's a range of size, but I think that the point here is not so much what is being produced. I understand that housing is the focus, but the success of TIF is based on the increment that is going to be generated. So if you have a wastewater project, even the Fairhaven project, for example,
Yeah.
it's very small. I think it's less than 30 acres, but the wastewater project is somewhere between $5 and $7 million. So yes, while we're not doing hundreds of millions of dollars, it's still significant. And if you're going to bond for that amount of money, you need to be able to make sure that you're going to generate that future income to be able to pay back that infrastructure project over a period of time. So if you're just relying on affordable housing to do that, I am
housing.
concerned, or just a housing development project, I am concerned that you're not going to be able to generate enough increment, or you're going to need to have TIF districts or TIF chip projects extend for 30, 40 years in order to pay down their increment, which is also administratively burdensome. Currently we have a 20-year limitation. This statute, as I read it yesterday, didn't have a limit at all.
So
It was just until the TIF debt was paid. So if you're going to limit, you have to understand that it's going to take a longer time potentially to pay back.
pay it off. No, I think we hear you on the
And
housing.
so for BEPC, that's a longer period of time that we're going to be having to administer the program. And I'm hopeful that I would be alive in 40 years, but I'm not going to be administering that program.
Well, and for grand list purposes and for a number of our other purposes, I think all of us would hope that nothing would go beyond 20 years.
So if you're going to say that
So-
you don't want it to go beyond 20 years,
Say.
you've got to have the flexibility to include other types of uses.
Got it. I think we hear you.
Okay.
The housing may not produce the necessary increment or
Right.
enough. Right.
So then in terms of improvements, we suggested some.
Or, sorry, and your definition of financing is the 20 years.
The financing, what we said for financing is that we would just like this to be consistent with the current TIF statute. I haven't looked at the other definitions, so I can't provide an opinion on that, but in looking at 1.1, we just wanted these definitions to be consistent between the programs, which would reduce confusion, and also administratively, it just makes it easier for us if we're not having to bounce between two different definitions.
Okay,
Then just quickly, definition of improvements. We propose that, improvements will mean, the public purpose definition, which is in the regular TIF statute, but it includes, but is not limited to housing, flood resiliency, flood mitigation, brownfield remediation, utilities, digital infrastructure. I will say, we did hear from, the broadband folks, and they requested, of us to include digital infrastructure, as a way to ensure that, Vermonters, all Vermonters, when we're doing a housing or some sort of a public infrastructure project, that digital infrastructure be included, so that, all members of that community can be offered the opportunity to have, choices for
I think
broadband.
that would be a great addition.
In terms of the flood resiliency and the flood mitigation, that is something that we have heard from, the city of Barry, and other, communities that have been hard hit by the flooding of the last couple of years. And this offers opportunities for municipalities to potentially buy project, parcels and, potentially redevelop those parcels that would otherwise, if they were part of a FEMA buyout, would be off the tax rolls, and the grand list forever. So this is an opportunity for, a municipality to potentially purchase and then redevelop and, use flood resiliency and flood mitigation,
Which you have good examples of behind you.
yes.
Springfield and Greenhouse too. I mean, many parties.
And then, improvements, we also included, the funding of debt service interest payments for up to 4 years. That is slightly different, than the regular TIC statute. And the reason for that change is because what we have
Regular
seen,
statute is
2 or 3,
two.
Two. So we wanted it to be 4 because it could take, because these are smaller projects, it could take municipalities a little bit longer to generate that increment in those first 4 years or so. Then in terms of the scope of BEPC, I know that there's been proposals, and I don't know if I should be grateful to the shout outs by the legislature or, concerned, but I think I'm mostly concerned, because BEPC is a council. It was legislatively created to review and approve the veggie and the TIF applications. It's actually the council that's made up of 11 voting members. 2 of them are your colleagues, one from the House, one from the Senate.
Wendy Harrison from the Senate.
Yes.
And
Abby Duke from the
Abby,
House.
that's right. Abby's the new one.
Our staff is currently made up of myself as the executive director, which is legislatively created, and I'm appointed by the governor. And then the legislature called out an administrative staff. Does not say how many administrative staff. We currently have 1 administrative staff. We are not supportive of expanding BEPC's staff role to allow for administrative approval of the application components without the council's input and consent. And I feel very strongly about that because it is the council's responsibility, that is in your enabling statute,
Right.
that they are the ones that approve the applications. When we were doing the CRRP program, the council still approved those applications. There is a lot of behind the scenes work that happens to make sure that those applications are available for council members to review. We work closely with the municipalities to make sure that they're having all of the information that's provided to us, so that we can bring applications to the council so that the council can make informed decisions.
So their ask here is step 1 is the legislative body, whoever votes and approves it initially. The council, I assume it would be the council that would vote on these projects.
Jump in.
Yeah.
So
jump
go
in.
ahead and jump in about which,
Yeah,
Because I,
exactly. We're talking about the location criterion, which
Yeah.
affects the route that an application to VEPC goes through. If you're taking that subdivision one, which we just discussed, expanding to include tier two as well, anything in that location criteria one, an application submitted to meet that criterion would be staff approval. That's what we're talking about.
yeah, I
That could
don't,
be a substantial, that could be the vast majority.
but
I think that it would be helpful to have, especially because I am not comfortable as the executive director being the sole person responsible
you.
for deciding what public funds are being used.
and the
So
council meets once
we met once a month, but we can meet have special meetings if necessary. My experience in working with municipalities, and certainly David can talk to this because he works with municipalities and a consultant. But is that there is a lot of back and forth that goes on between the program coordinator or program manager and the municipalities to ensure that the statutory requirements are being met.
So once those are met and voted on, and then the funnel is, and the question is, does it go to the staff or the council? Is that your
It
question?
goes to,
Is that your?
no, my concern is that this would allow for the staff to make a unilateral decision to approve an application without the council's consideration.
And you're asking that the council be included in
Every decision.
in every decision?
Yes.
And I guess, at first blush, I don't know how the committee feels about that. I mean, I think that if that's the way decisions are made at Pepsi, that seems to make sense to graft onto it. Thomas.
The only thought I have, and I guess I would connect it back to a previous point from earlier on, is that my ideas or thoughts of Project TIP was going to be, it was a simpler, smaller procedure, but I'm worried that your financing language is mapping the current vote requirements of the communities. I actually kind of like what we had here because I saw some of these, maybe they are administrative, especially if some of the debt isn't held by the municipality, but held by the private developer.
Right.
So I'm worried that if we completely emulate the existing TIF, we're not achieving the simplicity, maybe the ease of administrative deployment that the project TIFs are after.
So that's a fair point. However, I would rather have the municipalities be doing their due diligence to make sure that the projects are going to be viable and that you are, you're gonna, if you're gonna bond, the municipality has to go to their voters to be able to do that. And if the developer is gonna take on the debt, then you would not need to go to the voter. And if we need to tweak the language, we can. Like I said, I haven't seen 2.2, so I'm happy to review that and I'm happy to meet with John.
I think that might be a great suggestion.
That was
Yeah.
what I wanted to ask. If I'm happy to meet today. I just want to make sure I do what my clients want me to do.
I think that would be great because I think we're relying on Betsy. We need Betsy to work with us enabling this proposal. And I think it would be great if we could figure out a method to thread the needle.
I agree.
So that is what I think that all of us, the team, empower you to do. Yeah, I think there are some other substantive things we need to chat about, but I think on this particular piece, let's do that.
Right.
Okay, and Jessica, keep going. Because
Okay. So then, the next point that I had was, expanding the eligibility beyond tier 1. What I heard today is that you're willing to expand that to tier 2.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, that's what I think many of us were hoping from the beginning that this was a tier 2.
Right. We agree with, the administration, that the program should really be focusing on these rural areas. We really have heard from rural communities that the current TIF model is not a workable model for them and that they would have limited access to be able to use the program. VEPC is supportive of inclusion of flood resiliency measures based on conversations with the communities that are in the flood prone areas. We have proposed language around that, in terms of improving flood resiliency, being able to develop and purchase and improve flood prone properties. we include new and rehabilitated housing. The project affecting remediation and redevelopment of a brownfield. We also included language from our CRRP, which would include at least one entirely new business or business operation, and that the business would provide new quality full-time jobs. And then lastly, that the development could enhance transportation or public recreation, which traffic patterns or flow, including the development of recreational trail systems. So that's a broader piece to.
Is the intent that it's all of the above or?
Well, not all, you wouldn't have to meet every single one. No,
It's all
no. But just that,
meeting some and one or more.
Mhm.
Yeah, Thomas.
I appreciate all this commentary. I'm just worried about our clock. I feel like we need to pass a bill out, and I really like the other language. Your concerns are very valid, and what I'm seeing happen is maybe that we take these up at the House when the House gets these things over there. But when it comes to like one of your first points about expanding this to all economic development projects, I'm concerned. I mean, are we going to put parameters that this won't be for strip malls? I mean, what are going to be the boundaries? So for me, housing is the thing that unifies us in support for redirecting these funds away from the ed fund, and mixed use is absolutely supportable as long as there's a housing piece.
Mhm.
So with knowing that by Friday, we have to pass a bill out of committee, I think all of these are valid points, but I've been really happy with how Jonathan is approaching this so far. So that's just this point I'll make.
No, I think it's a good point. On the other hand, I've also been hearing from the RDCs that there are a lot of concerns about not including more economic development, which is what TIF was designed to do in the first place. So
Madam Chair,
yes, Keisha.
maybe you were gonna say this, but I think we need to work on this bill outside of committee. We're not gonna do a good job of this sitting here in committee, and there's a lot of better minds to help us work on the language. So I'm volunteering myself, and I'm volunteering Tom also.
I think that was where I was just going to go. So what I was going to suggest is that we work together, seeing what we can blend and work on and threading some of this needle together in the next day or two, because we're going to need to see this. And it may not be absolutely everything either that you may want at this moment. But this is a proposal that's going to be continued to be worked on all session.
Mhm.
And I think we need to get it to a point where it's workable for you. And because you are the person who's administering. So we are dependent on you to do that. And I think we have to honor that. But I also think we need to be able to understand or appreciate it and have a priority of housing for this, at least for some of, it's an expanded priority of the TIF notion initially for housing. So I would, and I think our committee would look at if
We've already been in communication.
so we need to be in productive communication and maybe come back with something that we can look at that will lend some of these. And I'm happy to be involved. Keisha and Tom, I think we're all happy to be used as you want.
The question I would have, so I appreciate this because that is the authorization that I need to do something here. Are you comfortable, say, Dr. Harley's free today? Are you comfortable with me meeting
You're free or you will
independently, or do you all want to be part of that conversation? Because some of it will be getting on the same page as to what particular language means, but then there will be substantive decisions to be made
Right.
that neither of us can.
I think once you're ready with substantive decisions that we have to make some decisions about, bring us in or come back or come back and discuss.
Madam
that-
Chair,
Yes, Keisha.
I want to come back in and say this, but I also just want to say in general, as we start this week, that to me, this is important enough to get a rule suspension around, far more important to me than data privacy. So if we're going to be looking at a rule suspension, I wouldn't support taking up data privacy until we finish this and seek
Thank you.
to
I
advance it.
don't think we need to go there yet. And yes, I definitely, we are in conversation with the corner office. So, because this is a very important bill for the Senate to be taking up and getting over to the House by crossover.
Right.
So,
Can I just
We are giving you permission, we are unleashing you.
Okay.
And,
that's great.
and David is gonna come join us, so we're all gonna hear additional thoughts or supports from
Yeah.
David and the team of Let's Build Homes.
Okay.
Is there anything last thing you'd like to say? And Michael, we apologize, we're gonna be a little late.
There is a policy decision I think that we need to talk about. So in the project-based model, I think that it's important that we are able to utilize as much of the increment as possible. And right now, municipalities can use up to 70% of the educational increment and have to use no less than 85% of the municipal increment. We are proposing here that municipalities, given that these are smaller projects, hopefully for a shorter period of time, that they could use 100% of the municipal increment and 100% of the ed fund increment. Now, if I heard that that is not going to be workable, it would be really helpful to know from this committee, what is the percentage of the educational increment that you're comfortable proposing? That's going to be a policy choice.
And that's for something for us to.
That's for you to decide. But I think the municipal increment should absolutely be 100%.
And just for context on what the current draft says, it's for the education property tax increment, no more than 80%, so it wouldn't go up to 100%. And for the municipal, it would be floored at whatever that education property tax increment is. So they can use 100%, but they would be floored at whatever the education property tax increment happens to be. So if a municipality was using 70% of the education property tax increment, they could use as little as 70% of the municipal tax increment, but they would be allowed.
But they'd be allowed to go to 100.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Just that's what the current situation. I'm not saying that you have to do it this way. I'm just trying to give you what the grounds is. Right?
So I think we need to think, I think that's good. I think we need to think about I think we need to probably think on that and not make a decision at this very moment. And let us see what we produce. And I think
Madam
Brett, do
Chair,
you have something to add?
I do. Sorry for my
COVID
voice.
law?
Brett Long, I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development, and I was encouraged to hear Senator Chittenden talk about developer debt because, again, I'm a draft behind as well, but I think Section 1910 only provides for municipalities to issue debt or incur debt. Maybe another thing you want to look at as you're going through the draft.
Yeah, John has a response, Brett.
Any of the sponsors can take on financing for the program. It's that we only have to the state only needs to authorize a municipality to incur debt. They don't have to authorize it just has to do with the state being diligent. You don't have to authorize a developer to finance a project.
Right.
They can do that without law. That's
Which they do all the time.
So the program does contemplate that any of the sponsors, which could be municipality,
Right.
developer, or independent agency, could finance the project. But that's why 1910 only addresses a municipality, because that's the only thing that the state needs to authorize. It's not saying that those others can't have it.
So the sponsors can all, they don't need the state to authorize their debt. Then they can do that. They can take debt at any point. As long
Right,
as
but
they're-
if the state.
Do they need
the-
authorization to use the increment to
Right.
and provide it to a developer?
Yes, and that is required.
Yeah, so we need authorization for that, but not for the debt.
Those are both. Yeah.
And I have a process question in terms of, why the call out between a sponsor and a developer? Why have both?
I mean, maybe I should let the committee answer this, but my understanding of the concept is that you could have 3 separate parties here operating. It might not be the developer taking on debt, right? It could be I should just say, this is what I heard from the Let's Build Home folks to contemplate 3 different sponsors, and that's what's in the draft. There.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a good moment actually for David White to join us. I mean, David, why don't you just bring your chair up and join Jessica right there? Because we don't have a lot of chairs to use chairs with.
You want me to just-
No, why don't you just stay right there and move over a little bit and David's gonna come and join him. David, thank you. We are. So. How is he? Well, not so bad. We have lots of fun. David, welcome.
Thank you.
So maybe that's the perfect segue to your testimony.
Sounds great. So, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I am David White. I'm president of White Burke Real Estate Advisors. And we're thrilled on a volunteer basis. I am working with Let's Build Homes, but I'm not on the board. And I don't officially represent Let's Build Homes, but I am one of the primary originators of this concept and been deeply involved in some drafting on it. And it's something that's, I will admit, near and dear to my heart. Let me take just a moment for those of you who don't know me, tell you a little bit about my background, just so you know where I'm coming from. I've been involved in community development work in Vermont since 1980. I was actually founding executive director of a nonprofit downtown revitalization group right here in Montpelier in 1980. Went on to get my master's degree in community economic development and to become director of community development for the city of Montpelier. Moved from outside City Hall into City Hall and went through, for a period of time, I was vice president of Pomerleau Real Estate. And then in 1990, so 35 years ago, I can hardly believe I'm old enough to say that, founded my own company. So I've been active on a consulting basis, working on economic development, community development in my own company for 35 years. And we have, among the things that we have been involved with, we have set up 7 of the last 8 TIF districts in Vermont. So there's no question we know a great deal about TIF and how that works. We've worked closely with Jessica and her predecessors. I saw Fred Kenny here earlier. We worked with Fred when, in fact, when we first started working on TIF, Fred was the executive director of VEPSI at that time. And we currently have, I don't know, 8 or 10 clients who are municipalities. The majority of our clients are actually municipalities or major institutions. UVM Medical Center, for example, is a client of ours. And for the municipalities, we are involved in doing economic development, community development work. And they range from St. Albans to Burlington to Rockingham, Bellows Falls, Rutland, Killington are all clients. Springfield, Newport are all clients. So that's just by way of background and where I come from on this. So I had a whole presentation ready with PowerPoint. I'm going to scrap that. Having heard this conversation, what I'd like to do is address some of the specifics the questions that have come up. And let me start by saying I would like to volunteer to work with all of you on the crafting of the language, because I think I have a pretty solid understanding of both how TIF works, but also how this might be different and why some of the choices that we made as we were coming up with the concept were made the way they were. It doesn't mean that you need to do what we wanted, but nonetheless, I think I can at least explain some of those things. And it may be helpful in terms of the drafting, and I would certainly like to see the whole Let's Build Homes Coalition behind whatever direction this ultimately takes. So what I'm going to do is kind of go through my quick notes that I was taking as I listened to John and Jessica talk, and just simply add some information, if I may.
Great. Thank you, David. That's exactly why we needed the 3 of you in the room at the same time.
Great. So let me talk a little bit about the location criteria. Let me start right there. Personally, I'm comfortable adding tier 2. I've heard some people are less comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with it. I want to be clear that the reason why we, and this was touched on, but the reason why we included the concept of existing settlements really was to cover this interim period when the tiers are not yet established. Because when you think about many of the small, and make sure that smaller communities were eligible. Now, when you think about smaller communities, many of them don't have a designated downtown. They don't have a designated village center. And we wanted to make sure that those that don't had an avenue during this interim period to be able to apply for use of this program. So one possible way of addressing that in the language would be to specifically state this, that, on an interim basis, until the tiers are established, that there are these, two different approaches. One is specifically the areas that specifically exempted in 181, and the other is through the existing settlements. But that once the tiers are established, those go away. Would be one way of addressing that. And then you can have tier 1A, tier 1B, and tier 2 as the eligible areas once you go forward. But that was the thinking behind using existing settlements. And regarding the question about, I think that you asked, there absolutely is a chart for AMI. It's published by HUD, and I know VHFA puts out their own version of it.
We'll get it from JFO.
You can get it right from JFO, or I assume JFO has it, but VHFA certainly does. It's downloadable from their website, and it's an entire chart of family size and income levels by county and so forth. So that is available.
Can I just say
Yes,
something about
please.
that? So the only concern I would have would be in the monitoring. If I didn't get to the performance measures or our monitoring, but if you're expecting GovC to be the administrative agency that's going to go in and make sure that, family sizes, like, that seems like it could be a challenge for GovC to be the ones that are certifying that. And if we're just going to be relying on the landlords to provide those certifications, we would just want to make sure that those, again, I'll talk with John and we can work out those.
I think you can work that, but project developer, the project manager, somebody should be
able to do that. It's
independent of you.
just. Right.
We're coming. I'll figure it out.
I think that's a very legitimate point, and I'm sympathetic to your small staff, by the way.
Yeah.
So if you leave in the affordability criterion of 200%, that becomes an issue. If you don't put that in, it's not an issue, right? It's nothing to be monitored. One way of doing that is to require self-certifications,
Right.
annually, for the developer to be able to, secure the rental rates, and here's how they qualify, and hereby certify, that could be required. Something like that, if you were to leave that in. To the concern, which I 100% agree with, by the way, about the infrastructure being limited to only a housing project, it was certainly never my intent that would be the case.
It's not only.
That you would be able to pay for the infrastructure because it's required for that specific project. But once it's in place, no limits on how it would get used, was the way I was envisioning it, although, the draft doesn't explicitly say that. And it certainly could, but it was not intended in my mind to say you could never have, say, hook onto that sewer line, any other use. But if it's needed for that project, that's that.
So enabling for a
Right.
specific project, but not limited to.
Correct. That's the way I was envisioning.
Can I jump in?
Makes sense to me.
That's consistent with the draft. I actually had the question with Jessica, because I thought maybe you were making an empirical point rather than a restrictive language point, which is the language doesn't say that the infrastructure has to be used exclusively for housing. Housing is the condition. The housing development is the condition you have to meet when infrastructure is put in, but the infrastructure can be used for other things. Was the point that you were making that the specific infrastructure that would be chosen for these projects would somehow be exclusive to the housing development because the housing developer would be part of that coordination?
Well, but it's only, so the logistical problem becomes then, is the increment only going to be repaying for that piece that's related to the housing? And then how would VEPC administer that proportionality of increment to that particular project?
So to that particular point, for the committee's benefit, there's a proportionality constraint for TIF districts on the books, which works exactly as described. There is no proportionality constraint here in this case, so you could use the increment to the full extent available to pay for the financing. The separate point about the economic constraints of how large your increment is going to be, same point. completely, right, like if you're confined to a small location and you just have it developed, there's a question as to how they develop there.
Isn't that consistent with our intent? This is a project-based TIF, so we are financing the enabling infrastructure for that project, whether or not it's used differently, but TIFs are a geographic district, which is where you do the proportionality pieces, so I still like our language.
But I think what I think David is saying is that there's no reason if you would build an infrastructure piece that enables the project, that if the infrastructure is big enough and expansive enough, it could be used for a whole range of reasons.
Absolutely.
In addition to,
Yes.
so if you're going to build housing, you might want some grocery store or you might want other infrastructure, things that were enabled by that infrastructure.
The increment will pay off just the debt for that infrastructure,
But
regardless of how it's being used during its lifespan.
Right.
but
Yeah,
Right.
I think the concern for VEPSIs is that the housing isn't going to produce enough increment.
And it may not, right? I know.
Well, and
That's a problem.
yes, and it's also administratively, how are we going to, over the period of time, like if you have just that project, can that project expand? And if it expands out, can you expand it to a non-housing if it's going to be using the same infrastructure?
I think the answer from what I'm hearing is yes.
So
As long as the project is enabled and built and the housing is built, that it could be used.
that's not how the statute is currently worded, but we can get together and come up with language that might help
I look
us.
to you, Counselor.
Yeah, we can meet. I think there are a lot of things where we'll talk.
Like at a high level, it's conceptually feasible. But when you get into the weeds of administering the programs and the challenges and the criticisms that have come from administering the programs, it would be really helpful for us to have clarity going into this, as opposed, especially if this is gonna be, some sort of a pilot project, or, I agree with Senator Chittenden. If all 200 and something communities come knocking on our door, that's great. But the reality is that since the legislature limited the TIF districts back in 2013, was it 2013 or 2017?
No, I was sadly still in the House on Ways and Means when we did that.
So it's 2013.
I believe so.
We've had 5, 6 TIF districts that are currently on the books. New TIF districts, we've had 4.
4, yeah.
4.
Yeah.
So clearly, and the numbers that we've received from tax is
But
that
the bar is of course much higher.
it is. However, you can also look at the JFO or the tax data that shows that we have had grand list growth at maybe 1%
Yes.
over the last 20 years. So I think as long as we can work together and we can get input from Senator Chittenden, from you, from the full committee, just so that we are clear going forward, and working with David, obviously, too.
Dave, other thoughts?
Yeah, 200
And
so.
thank you for your offer to work together. This is great because
Sure.
well, the only way we're going to get this done by Friday is, or maybe Monday, but Friday we're aiming for, is to do this. And I think all of us need to appreciate this as a work in progress.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think getting it in reasonably good shape by hopefully Friday, and then continuing to work on it makes total sense. There are going to be some loose ends, I think, no doubt, that they need some work. Let me talk next about the mixed use, and let me be perfectly blunt. I totally 100% unequivocally support the idea that we should be doing project-based STIFs that allow economic development. Frankly, I love the idea of it allowing 100% commercial and industrial. That said, we made the choice to focus on this, and I still support this position on housing because we think that's what's politically saleable in the legislature.
Well,
I
and also it's the crisis.
It's the
currently
crisis.
trying
It's the
to address.
crisis now, and I think we can get it through the legislature. I'm not convinced. You guys know this better than I do.
We agree. This is why we're here.
So, as much as I would love to do that, and, I saw Bob Flint here earlier and so forth, I can't tell you how much I agree that project-based TIF should allow more. I think this is so important. We've got to get housing built. That's why we focused it solely on housing. If later it can be expanded to include that, that can be addressed politically later. So that's just to that point. But it does raise the economic question. I'm totally there. And every project is unique, right? I've worked on countless projects over the last 35 years around the state, and each one has its own financial challenges. You've got to figure out for each one, what can you afford? What can't you afford? And I can't think of a single TIF district I've been involved with where where TIF alone has paid for the infrastructure. We have always had to go out and get other grant funding, or we've had to dip into, a capital fund that the municipality may already have, or, a whole mix of things to figure out how you put it together. I don't think that in many cases, the increment from the housing project itself will be sufficient to pay whatever the cost of the infrastructure is. And that's one of the challenges that we have in TIF. And that's one of the challenges I think will be faced here. But it's simply a reality. And again, but it's a tool that you add to the toolbox to help you get to the point you can actually achieve the projects you want to achieve, but not complete in and of itself. And I'll add, it doesn't solve the real problem that the economics of the housing project itself may not work. The cost of development may be higher than what the rental rates or the sales prices will support, depending on the structure. So there's a challenge there, and this is not intended to address that challenge. Again, it's at least removing that group of costs from the developer, and then working on other kinds of sources to try to be able to fill that gap if it exists for any individual project. But it's adding tools to the toolbox, and I think that it's valuable that way. But I totally agree. That's right. Regarding financing, I'm totally comfortable with the idea that the right to retain education funds should be limited to 20 years. I'm fine with that. Don't know whether Let's Build Homes is. Again, I'm not speaking for them, but I'm fine with that. But I want to be clear that that is not a restriction, a limit necessarily on the length of the financing. There are a number of TIF districts where we've issued 30-year bonds, and you use only the municipal increment later.
Right, but the bond is different from the increment.
Is different from the increment, exactly. So
So 20 years of
education increment.
right,
Yep.
Repayment.
which may
20
or may
years of
not be.
repayment using the.
Yeah. So in terms of retention of that, I'm moving on to whether staff has the authority to approve or not. Again, I'm very sympathetic to your position on it. That was an effort purely to keep this as simple as possible and expeditious. One of the criticisms and one of the challenges we've had with TIF is that the process takes so much time, going through everything in the municipality and then with MEPC and then going to a bond vote and so forth and so on, that some developers say, forget it. The market's going to be gone by the time I get there or whatever. And they say, I don't want to get involved.
But is the council's time weighing and making a decision the barrier?
It's not the barrier, but it's a piece of it. So it was simply an effort to make it as simple as possible.
Right. No, and I think
but I'm
we around
sympathetic
this
to you not
table.
wanting that authority.
Right. No, and I think we appreciate that, but we also have to deal with the realities of a staff that is very limited. So at what point can we empower earlier some of the decisions that need to be made so that by the time it gets to BEPC, it can be much more, it can be handled in a more expedited fashion.
Well, with CR.
Does that
you did
make sense?
You did some of those CR.
No, didn't do anything.
So with CRP, it took one meeting. And so the reality is that I agree with David that sometimes developers don't want to get involved because it takes too long. Having said that, that's also, I think, a benefit to the program because you're ensuring that there's viability and that the amount of financing that's going to be required is sufficient so that the council, when making a decision to allow for public dollars to be invested. And I also, I think that the council should be making those decisions. We can try to move it through as expeditiously as possible. Also, as a staff person, there's no enabling legislation for staff to be the one making those decisions right now.
David.
Can you
Yeah.
address for the new guy in the room, why Pepsi needs to be included as a kind of a gate for the whole process at all? Why not just give the authority to the municipalities, let the municipalities decide if this is appropriate or inappropriate?
Well, that would be because, Pepsi is the, legislative body that was created to approve TIF districts.
Right.
As I understand, and certainly others in the room have much more historical knowledge, that because we are using educational fund dollars and those dollars are public dollars, that the legislature needs a body to be able to approve the use of those public dollars by municipalities, because we have an education fund that is one, as opposed to other states
Okay.
like Maine that
So,
do that.
thank you. Thank you.
David.
Okay, on the question of, the concept of the sponsor. So, what we were envisioning is that one of the existing agencies, whether it's, Michael Bond, Vermont Municipal Bond Bank, or whether it's, Vermont Economic Development Authority, would be selected. We just don't know which one is the most appropriate. Maybe VHFA, which would be a conduit for bond financing for this effort. And would not have to, so there'd be one of three. It would be either the municipality would do it as with TIF, or the developer would borrow the money and there would be the rebate to pay that portion of the debt service, or that would be rebated to this third party agency. And in my mind, it would be either be the VHFA or the bond bank. I'm not sure which one's most appropriate, and I don't know whether Michael would want to take that on with his staffing limitations and so forth. But it would be one of those who could then do the bonding.
Can I ask a
For that.
question?
Sure.
Would the developer be the one, though, that if VITA was gonna be the one financing the debt, it would be the developer that would be on the hook to pay back that debt?
Well, you'd still pay the taxes, and the municipality, instead of refunding that portion of the taxes to the developer who paid the debt service or paying directly themselves, would make that payment to the bonding agency, to VITA or VHFA.
So that's just another administrative step.
Yeah.
Because normally what happens is that if a developer takes out the debt, they're gonna go out and finance their own debt. And so if we're gonna give a rebate to repay that debt, why would we need a sponsor to do that? Why would you not?
You don't necessarily. We were, there are over 30 states that do that kind of mechanism around the country, where it is actually refunded to the developer and the developer has the debt. But we put it in as an alternative, and if it's that it could be a third party agency like the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank. That would be looked to rather than the developer and rather than the municipality. And it was trying to provide flexibility.
Right.
Do you see opportunities for exploitation without greater parameters around what the sponsor could entail or not?
No, not based on what TIF currently does.
So, and we have Michael in the room.
Yeah.
So Michael, Don, if you want to weigh in on this discussion, great. I'm just going to ask, because we have a number of witnesses who are here today to testify on the fair protection provisions in our housing bill. And and so I'm just curious if we're willing as a committee to stay till 12:15.
Sure, I just drink a lot of coffee, so I'll be right back.
Okay. If that's okay, because I think we need to. Ooh, shit. Sorry, I apologize. Because I think we need a few more minutes on this to get it to a point where we then have you, as they say, go up to the cafeteria and begin to work this out so that we can consider it in a day or two. I know it's a challenge. I know.
So I should be staying up here tonight.
You brought your pillow, didn't you?
Because we need to hear from the crowd outside and from Michael. So those are the two other pieces we need to try and get done this morning.
I can switch places with Michael if you.
So, but I just want to make sure David is, Michael, if you have any, you want to weigh in here?
I have to admit, I was looking at my schedule for tomorrow, so I
Okay,
wasn't
okay.
totally following the exact questions
Okay.
for us.
So David, do you want to just reiterate what you talk about in terms of the sponsor?
Yeah, so, the way we posed this, that the debt could be incurred in one of three ways. Either by, or incurred by one of three different, parties. Either by the municipality, similar to the way Tiffany's done, and presuming that then that would flow through to you, as it does currently, or by the developer, and there would be a rebate of the incremental taxes and help put that portion of the developer's debt directly related to infrastructure, or that a third-party agency, and this is where you come in, would issue bonded debt, and that could be either from municipal bond bank or VITA or VHFA. I've not had conversations with you or the other two agencies around whether or not you'd be interested and willing to take on that role. It was my thought that this legislation would specify one of the three as a possible conduit for issuing the bonds rather than this as an option alternative to the municipality or the developer.
Yeah, that third option is not.
Michael, just identify.
Oh, yeah, sorry, apologies. Michael Gahn, Executive Director of the Vermont Bond Bank, for the record. I have not seen that third model, which isn't to say is impossible. I mean, it looks a lot like the special property tax bonds issued by VHFA a number of years ago, the housing bond. That is a state tax. There's no reason we couldn't assign those revenues. I think we'd have to be careful about not having it look like net tax supported debt from the state's perspective. I think probably a cleaner way to do that is to make it a special obligation of the sponsoring municipality. I do think like generally bond votes are, and there was a great article I thought in the Vermont Public about this, are increasingly a new source of NIMBY activity. And so figuring out ways to, specify that or limit the debt to those that are benefiting from it, and giving those folks a say is an important part of making this all work. There was originally a revenue bond proposal as part of it. I don't know where that stands now. I have a complementary idea that may be too late for this committee from what I'm hearing. But those, I guess, would be my sentiments. But I think what we're hearing, and I think to the point of which I'm asked to testify primarily, is the Vermont Sustainable Infrastructure Fund. You're hearing a lot of potentially like sort of unique ideas come about in terms of what the debt looks like. Some of those will look right down the middle, like what we normally do, where they're geo-backed. It's a muni bond. We get that. We know how to do that. To the extent it's more unique, where the credit is more limited from those projects that are supporting it, then that we start to want to find a different source for that. And so the Housing Infrastructure Fund serves two purposes. One, it's to accommodate these sort of unique credit considerations with a lot of flexibility. Two, it's equity. So we can drive down that cost as low as we can with the administrative cost, which we think could be around 1%. And that on $1 million loan, for example, that's 20 years, that essentially produces between like $200,000 to $350,000 worth of equity. Because if you compare, a higher rate that's market rate, that's tax exempt, or you compare the developer's cost of capital, versus 1%, that difference in debt service, if you sort of take it in today's dollars, is on $1 million loan somewhere between $200,000 and $350,000. So that's like for each $1 million that you're loaning, that's like you're getting a grant for $350,000 by having this low cost revolving loan fund. So those are the applications I see of this of this loan fund that I think will be really meaningful for driving down the cost of infrastructure to support housing. Certainly, we see that all over the place. Before this came about, the SWEEP or the Financial Administrators of State's SRF program, the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, and that program is not very well accommodated to infrastructure expansion. So this would have more flexibility.
Right, so we're bouncing back and forth here a bit because
Yeah.
Michael was here to talk about the $9.1 million infrastructure sustainability fund. But they go in many ways hand in
Yes.
glove here,
Yeah.
as David, that was the perfect pivot point, actually. And so I guess one of my questions with that is $9.1 million isn't gonna take us very far.
Yeah, no, and that's been the consistent feedback. Number one, I'd answer that if we produce more units, doesn't matter. Number two, there has been in the most recent health side draft, increasing that amount from 9 million to 50 million.
I appreciate that.
Regardless, I think we work with a bunch of different pots of money every day. And we have a good understanding about how we leverage those different pots of money. So for the bigger projects, we'd see some of this fund potentially sort of like running side by side our conventional program to drive down the interest rate and make that project more feasible. For the smaller projects, we do direct loans. Potentially for some of the bigger, more independent projects, we'd use that corpus of that fund to provide some credit enhancement for those other loans. And one of my comments,
Jessica had
one of my comments I had was just to make sure we have that flexibility to do interfund loans with this so that we can be flexible, not having the funds exclusively needed to be domestic to that one fund. But if we can, use it in our bond fund and then use it over here, but then always
So
return
is our
back.
current language not enable that
I
flexibility?
would just like to make it like a bit more explicit, so there's zero questions about
Would
it.
you be kind enough, given our time?
Yes,
would you
I
be
did,
kind enough
and
to
I already,
email that to Cam,
yes, and I did that. I did that already.
because where's John? Because I think Cam has drafted that. so-
Yeah. So yeah, I've done that, and I'll be sure. to follow up.
Okay, great. So I think your partners in the continuing draft have just departed. But I think if we can coordinate this work so that we can have something to look at in the next 48 hours, that would be great. And I think did you have one other thing to say before we turn to fair housing?
Only that my paying clients are probably going to have to suffer a little bit for the next few days.
I probably won't suffer too much. But thank you, and we so appreciate, both of you
And-
enabling.
And I'm very happy to come back and talk about this more. And there are all kinds of other things I did want to talk about, but I know we're out of time. So
And
I'll let it
feel
go.
free to send us whatever you'd like us to read.
Okay.
And as we immerse ourselves in this week,
Great.
and Dave, we so appreciate your work, Michael.
Yeah.
Well, you both enable the huge, yes, you have something else you want to share?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's not as a substitute, but completely complementary to the concepts that are being discussed. Many other states have some additional public finance tools that I think would be very complementary and would help with some of the in particular wastewater projects that we've seen that have been gone down despite huge state subsidy for startup systems like the Westfords of the world.
Yes.
We have language on that we can send to you. I think it's not to be taken as a substitute for tax relief or finding dedicated sources for revenue to support infrastructure, but I think it could be very complementary. And I think what we have here is a situation where everything needs to be on the table. And so
It may not be able to be on the table this week, but
understood.
as
Heard
we
that.
know, it is evolving. I'm going to repeat this.
Right.
This project is evolving as it goes through both bodies.
Right.
So I think we would love to see that after crossover and or the House, which will be
Yeah, that-
hopefully taking up this proposal. So I think absolutely anything to improve it, we would welcome.
Great. Yes, the house is familiar. So See you again soon.
The houses are, this room will be very familiar to you as well.
Good, good.
Michael, thank you. So I think we don't need to look at.
Yeah, that was me. I promised a quick resolution.
And you were, well, I'm not sure we have a resolution, but certainly, very good.
Yes, great. Thank you.
So much. And
sorry.
great.
It was
Okay.
coffee here, between there as well.
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Is this your coloring book?
Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We'll figure that out. All right.
So the dad.
I love that.
Es un papá.
Like 9:30 and 10.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go make those.
Okay. And I have another bed. Okay. Great. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Brett, thank you. Hope you feel better. Thank you. Hope you feel better. We're moving forward. We're moving it forward. Okay, great. Is Keisha in the next one? She is. Is she still on Zoom? Okay, great. Terrific. So, who is, are you speaking for my for the fair housing piece of our housing bill?
Olga Cruz and myself, the interpreter.
Okay, but I think we need someone to kick it off, to give us I think we need somebody who's going to kick it off, who's going to speak to the whole request, and then we can have individual witnesses about it.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be Olga speaking. I'll be.
Hi, welcome back. Olga, hi, welcome. Rachel, that's right. Great to see you again. Rachel, it's good to see you again. So everybody pull out your housing bill, our draft of yesterday. And we are going to be looking at the fair housing pieces, which we looked at yesterday, and
What is that?
okay, great. And we are looking at draft 2.2. And we're looking at, I don't have these sections memorized. Where are our fair housing? Anyway, we're looking at the fair housing sections, and okay, we're looking at section 7 on page 19, and we're looking at 7, 8, and 9. Is that right? And we also have Christie. Excuse me. Hi. We need some quiet. We're going to be looking at sections 7, 8, and 9.
What's the draft?
And the draft is 2.2, the draft that we went through with Cam yesterday. So you can pull it up under Cam's name. Yesterday's agenda under the witness list. And thank you all for being here. This is great. There are a lot of you. This is wonderful. Sorry to keep you waiting. We have a very big housing bill with lots of complicated pieces that all of us need to understand for us to advocate for. So, thank you. So we are looking in these sections at extending our equal protections to adding to our protected classes, citizenship and immigration status, not just for renters, but also, I believe, for loans, and if we're doing this with unfair housing practices, public accommodations, and we are looking at expanding it to include protecting people further independent of their citizenship and their immigration status. So we would love to hear how this is a problem that we're solving for many of you.
Como esto sería como cierto pasaje, pues ayudaría a las comunidades.
Okay, is that clear?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. My name is Abel Luna. I'm an organizer for Migrant Justice. Basically, I will be trying to do my best to interpret for you guys and back and forth with Olga. But yeah, Olga is going to be our next.
And Olga's going to be our primary witness representing
Yes,
a
yes.
number of people and concerns. Great.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Olga Cruz, mi hija, disculpen los disturbios un poquito, soy una trabajadora en una granja de vacas y también soy parte de la organización de justicia migrante.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to be here. My name is Olga Cruz. This is my daughter as well. I am a dairy farm worker on the Vermont Dairy Farm, and I'm also part of the Migrant Justice Leadership.
Un poco del por qué estamos aquí es pues ver sobre la aceptación de que podamos rentar sin pedir un seguro social.
And we're basically here because we want to talk about an issue that is affecting our community, the ability to be able to rent a house or rent an apartment, without having to go through the issue of a social security number.
Como ustedes saben y como nosotros sabemos, Vermont está creciendo, Vermont se está desarrollando, mucha más gente está buscando trabajos en Vermont, pero algo impide es que puedan conseguir una vivienda.
So as you all know, and maybe some of you guys are aware, Vermont is growing. Vermont industries are growing. Vermont industries are developing. And there's a lot of people, migrant communities that, live in Vermont and want to work in these industries that are starting to expand. But the issue is that when people try to do so, at least a housing bill and also a workforce development bill where, the people that are needed to make sure that Vermont continues to grow and develop, cannot find a house or an apartment to live.
Personas que han dado testimonios y tanto amigos como familiares, ha sido muy difícil el poder buscar un trabajo que nos dé como una vivienda justa y digna. Es un poco difícil ese tema de que podamos nosotros buscar mejores trabajos. A veces nos vemos obligados a quedarnos en los trabajos donde somos maltratados y mal pagados y discriminados.
So I'm sure you guys have heard, our stories as a migrant community, but it's very difficult if you're a migrant worker in Vermont. If you want to, work in a different industry, besides dairy, it's really difficult to find a workplace, although we want to access these opportunities, although we want to be able to work in these expanding industries. It's almost impossible because if you cannot find a house, where are you going to be able to work, right? So those two things are connected. We want to stay in Vermont and we want to work in Vermont, but at the same time, this obstacle prohibits us, or it's a huge obstacle for us to work in these industries. And one of the things that happens is that if we're not able to find a house or an apartment, we have to go back to these places where we're trying to leave maybe the dairy industry or maybe a farm where we're not treated the best. So we're sort of forced because of this condition to go back to these workplaces where we're going to continue to be underpaid and we're going to continue to be mistreated and discriminated.
So maybe we just ask a question here. So you have, Olga, have you had an experience yourself with being rejected from a rental or from renting an apartment or a house? Have you been, or your colleagues been rejected from being able to rent an apartment or a house?
Creo que ya lo hemos dicho, no soy la única que ha hablado de este tema. Particularmente una hermana mía fue discriminada. Ella tuvo que adaptarse a algún contratista para buscarle un trabajo y al mismo tiempo un cuarto. donde el dinero de ella había sido robado. Tuvo que aceptar todo eso por más de un año porque no pudo conseguir una vivienda.
Yes, that's been my experience, but also experience of many people who have given testimony. And that is the experience of our community, you know, where we cannot find a house or rent an apartment. For example, I'll share a story about my sister, story of discrimination, you know, related to housing. You know, she was looking for a job and was looking to find, you know, this contractor that offered, you know, a job and also offer housing. Later on down the road, we learned that there was a lot of wage that were being steal from my sister and other employees. So, you know, we have to sort of adapt or accept some conditions because housing is provided and because it's really hard to find housing. We have no other way but to, you know, say yes to some.
So it's the golden handcuffs.
Yeah. Es como esa, es un beneficio, pero a mí no es como una cárcel.
Creo que también nosotros nos atrevemos a venir y hablar de estos temas porque son temas bastante importantes para nuestra comunidad. Hay temas que siempre tenemos que luchar para poder lograr algo, aun siendo seres humanos. A veces nuestros derechos no son respetados.
And yeah, so it is for us, this is a really important issue that, you know, this is why we're here to talk about this, to share our experience. This is important for our community. You know, we know that nothing is going to change unless we come and share our experience with you guys so that we're able to move forward and ensure that, you know, human rights for migrant communities are being respected and upheld in Vermont.
Es un tema también difícil porque por ejemplo, nosotros como familia, a mi esposo, mis hijas y yo nos hemos obligado a quedarnos en un lugar. Él ha tenido otras oportunidades de trabajo. No podemos aceptar un trabajo porque estamos conscientes de que no podemos conseguir una vivienda. Entonces, el momento de yo aceptar otro trabajo, me van a sacar de la granja donde uno trabaja. Y ¿dónde yo voy a poner a mi familia? Porque el ir y aplicar para una vivienda nos hace poner el número de seguro social.
And also, in my case, my family, you know, we have to stay near the farm where we work. There is other opportunities that my husband, you know, have been able to find. You know, but we come back to the same conversation and the same question. We cannot find a house because we don't have a social security number. So we have to stay where we are, although there are opportunities, you know, to go and work and continue to progress. You know, at the same time, you know, we have to stay here because we know housing is provided. And if I don't work anymore at the farm, that means I'm going to be losing my job, losing my house. And where is my daughter going to sleep? Where is my family going to sleep? And so these are real questions that we have as a community.
Right.
Creo que ustedes saben y nosotros también sabemos que como trabajadores inmigrantes estamos siendo parte de la economía de Vermont. Estamos haciendo que la economía siga fluyendo y eso no se puede negar porque eso es verdad. También estamos buscando de que al momento de nosotros ir y tratar de aplicar por una casa, que por el hecho de que ese pedazo de seguro social quede en blanco, no nos llamen nunca o no nos manden un mensaje de decir no fuiste aceptado o fuiste aceptado.
Right.
And also, you know, as an immigrant community, you know, we've been in Vermont for a long time, but we will continue to be in Vermont. We're not going anywhere, you know, and we have contributed to the economy of this state. Vermont continues to grow. We are, you know, part of the hands that are building Vermont up. You know, that cannot be denied in this room. And so we want to make sure that, you know, we have this ability to be able to rent an apartment. You know, we have to fill an application, we put out information, and there's always this question about a social security number, and we have to leave that blank. And So what does that mean? That means that no one is gonna call us, no one's gonna message us, no one is gonna reach out to us to let us know whether.
No one's gonna rent to you.
Rent to us, yeah.
So it strikes me this is primarily a rental issue. I know that the bankers have some concerns about mortgages, but this is primarily concern about being able to rent a house or an apartment, not to buy necessarily. Because we could take one step here, it's right.
Comprar casas o viviendas, como la gente no está pensando en comprar casas y que se trata más de comprar casa y que se puede compartir.
Creo que esto ha pasado en más lugares. Yo creo que es un tema no importando siento de compra o renta, no es algo que siento que queremos hablar, pero agregándolo, yo siento que lo que debemos hablar aquí es que no haya discriminación de parte de los dueños de casa o de los que rentan o venden. Siento que es eso que se debe agregar, es algo más grande, porque si, por ejemplo, ahora hablamos de renta, entonces nos va a tocar otra vez venir y hablar de ventas, o sea.
Okay.
Yeah, but primarily, I think it's important to focus on the issue that, the issue at hand is, people cannot rent an apartment, cannot rent a house. Yeah, so although, which is why we're focusing on this aspect. People might want to buy a house or not, that's.
Right, but that may be down the road. I think the rental issue is one we want to resolve and what we're really being asked to resolve.
Yeah, and just to finish what Olga mentioned is that, this is nothing new. This has been done before, in other states.
So what other states have done it? Or is that here?
There is
Is that other states that have done it?
Yes, I have
Great.
information.
So I think we have a couple questions, but we need to be done in 3 minutes. We've already, we're done. Randy, do you have a question, David? Tom?
Just a question. One of the purposes I gather of Social Security numbers will do a credit check. Well, credit check is done in that fashion with the automated credit bureaus that commercial users use. I also understood that you have to have a Social Security number in order to get a job. Is that right?
Yo voy a responder estas preguntas. Usted tiene que investigar. Nosotros investigamos que para revisar el crédito no necesita un seguro social. Y con la otra pregunta le voy a responder con otra cosa. Las vacas no se ordeñan solas.
Yeah, so I'll answer that in 2 parts. One is that, we have done investigation for 2 years. We've been at it for 2 years. We have some issue, and we've learned a lot. And we've learned that, Social Security number is not something that is required to, do a credit check or a history check. That's something that can be done with the person's information, name, address, date of birth, and you will get your answer. So Social Security number is not something that's needed. And for the second question that you asked, one of the things that I wanted to say is that how they mail themselves.
Y ustedes como senadores creo que saben y están informados de que tienen trabajadores inmigrantes. Con eso yo respondo todo.
And but also one to add is that, you guys are senators, are representatives of, Vermont. You guys know that this is the reality of Vermont. Vermont, industries depend on migrant labor, migrant hands to do the work. And so that is my answer.
Thank you. Our food industry is totally dependent all over the country on migrant. And so we appreciate, in this Economic Development Committee, we appreciate that. And
I just have one other question that I'd like to raise before we end. I know time is short. You mentioned that money obviously is an object to be able to find a place to rent. Are you being paid at least the federal ministry a state minimum wage?
This is in another bill, and so one of the key.
En algunos trabajos está siendo pagado el salario mínimo y eso es lo que estamos buscando, mejores opciones de trabajo. Pero para eso el primer paso debe ser encontrar una vivienda.
Yeah, there are places that are paying the minimum wage and, we would all love to be able to find, these places where we can get the minimum wage. But again, coming back to the question, where do we live? Do we want to access, workplaces, that are paying fair, that are paying, what they're supposed to be doing right, and, treating, with respect. The question is, where do we live? Do we want to access?
In other words, there are places that you're aware of that are not paying migrant workers the Vermont minimum wage. Is that a fair statement?
Lugares que sabemos, en nuestra experiencia.
It's information we need to know.
Yeah.
El sueldo mínimo.
Rachel, I think Rachel has something to add here. Just identify yourself.
Antes de eso, sabemos que hay lugares que no están pagando el salario mínimo, pero creo que esto no es para hablar de lo laboral, ni de la ley laboral, ni de la ley de tanto de que tengamos que hablar de otros temas. Yo creo que centrarnos en este tema de lo del seguro social, de la no discriminación. Voy a agregar algo rápido.
Yeah, so, of course, there are places, that don't pay the minimum wage that, maybe, also don't know. But, I want to make sure that we keep our conversations, related to the housing bill, the discrimination piece and the social security number piece.
Right.
This is why
We're asking because in an economic development bill, we are considering eliminating the sub-minimum wage for agricultural workers and requiring that agricultural workers be paid the minimum wage. And that's another bill. We hear you on the housing. I think we're clear that for rental housing in particular, this is critical. Rachel, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I would love to add something. For the record, my name is Rachel Elliott. I work with Migrant Justice. I will say last year we did a survey of immigrant dairy workers, and we found that on 87% of dairy farms that are not covered under the Milk with Dignity program, workers are paid less than the Vermont minimum wage. So yes, the vast majority of positions on those farms are sub-minimum wage positions. And that keys back into what Olga was saying earlier about how important it is to have the ability to leave those farms to get the fair treatment that people deserve. And people cannot leave those farms if they can't rent housing.
Right.
So that's where that connects back.
No, it's a bad circular.
Yeah.
I think we appreciate that.
Yeah.
But that's helpful about the minimum wage because we're in the
And that's something that the results of that survey are available on our website.
If you could kind of email them to us, that would be great.
No problem.
And we have another meeting in 2 minutes, so we need to conclude. We apologize, but we are very grateful not only for your work on our farms, which we all appreciate, but for being here in Vermont. And we welcome you and thank you for this testimony. It's very helpful.
And I know you guys want to wrap it up really quickly for the record. And so I know again, and just to share and echo the message that all has been, been saying this is a problem that, that our community is facing, and this is the reality. There are people that are living, 4, 5 people, 6 people per room, and that is also families, that's children. The reality is that that is happening because we cannot find a place to live. We don't have a roof over our heads. We show the social security number really is what we need to stop this practice. We can say we don't like discrimination. We don't agree with people being discriminated against, but if we don't kill this practice of this is something that continues to happen. And this is the reason why our community is excluded from accessing the housing market. That is the real issue here. There's other things like eliminating this practice, will really solve a huge issue for our community. And you guys have an opportunity right now, to do something. Vermont is falling behind. There's other states that have done this. This is not something out of the blue. This is not something new, even with the banks, but New York has figured out how to work with the banks so that there's no discrimination and people are being treated with respect and dignity and there's no human rights abuses. So all of this has been done before. This is not something new. This is
We're
what
not-
we want to encourage you guys
We're not inventing it.
to do the right thing and
Great.
you guys will impact the lives of hundreds of people.
Thank you. Rachel, last word, and then we need to end.
Oh, okay. I just wanted for the record to mention the names of the states that have similar legislation. There,
I thought that was here.
it is, but it's Washington State, New York, which includes wording around banking, Illinois, California, Minnesota, Alaska, and Guam. As I said, as you said, there's more information on the flyers we handed out, but I just wanted to name those states now for the record.
Great. And thank you. Muchas gracias.